Welcome to HortTube. My name is John Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do pretty much every Sunday. You can ask gardening questions down in the comment section below, and we pick from those each week, and usually pick somewhere in the mid to upper 20s, and there's 29 on here. We'll see. That's actually more than usual, and normally I talk a lot on some of these questions, so this one may be a while if I do the 29. Let's see. Holly's out here with me. She may be too wide of an angle over here right now, but she's out in the garden. It's early in the morning on Saturday. As I'm shooting this, the birds have a lot to say about it. So I'll have information at the end of this video about the open house or open garden we're having next Friday and Saturday. If you want more information about that, there are new t-shirts available. Send out a group email. Over on my website, there is an email newsletter sign up down at the bottom if you want to be included in those emails. But I had 3 new t-shirts over the last couple of weeks. 4 actually, there's a woman's cut as well for one of them, the Plant Nerd t-shirt. But this is the Holly t-shirt for her. It's just a silhouette of Holly over here and in some grass and some annuals like you see her in these videos. And I sent that email out yesterday, and a bunch of Holly t-shirts sold yesterday. So thank you guys very much for that. And it's nice to have her on a shirt because she's been a big part of this 7 years of YouTube, or 7.5 years of YouTube that it's been now. Let's see. The videos that went up this week, there's one from plants we brought back from Athens, Georgia that should be publishing like right now as I'm talking. One from Piccadilly Farm, where we stayed there, and then some sort of looking good in the garden video as well. An unboxing video for all the giveaways for the open garden. Okay, now I can remember the videos I actually put up this week. Steph has shot the second design video for the Learn to Garden video series, and I haven't gotten it edited. Probably won't this week either because we're so busy with plans for this. But within the next couple of weeks, those of you who own the Learn to Garden video series will get that second design video from Steph, and then there's going to be more as well. She's just going through the entire design process of thinking through laying out spaces and designing spaces. So there'll be more of those coming for the Learn to Garden video series. There's a discount below this video for the Learn to Garden video series. Okay, let's jump into some questions again, because there's 29. One of the questions, that came up from visiting Ram and Tom Giberson's garden down in Athens, Georgia. There's a playlist on the channel for if you want to go back and look at any of the videos from that garden down in Athens. There's some about the expense. What about the expense of that garden? And what's crazy about that garden, of course there is expense in it. I mean, there are 5 different waterfalls features in that garden. And, there's a duck house and a chicken house that are very, very nice. There's a greenhouse. There is a lot of expense in that garden, obviously. But interestingly, way, way, way less than I think anybody watching those videos would think, because the stone that you're seeing in those videos was actually, they got lucky when they got that property, and there was a road cut going in near them where they had to do some blasting. And so a lot of the rock that's actually in that garden, a lot of the big giant boulder steps and things that you're seeing were actually dumped on their upper driveway for free. That they were just trying to get rid of them. Very, very large stones. And so most of the big stones that you're seeing in that garden were actually for free. Second thing, most of the plants that are in that garden, there's almost no latest and greatest things. Ram gets plants and then propagates them herself. She has a nursery there. There's literally a sign on her upper gate that she's selling plants. It's so crazy. She actually has a little nursery operation there. And so most of the things in that garden were bought once, probably a lot of them from Piccadilly Farm, which is in that Athens area. It's in Bishop, Georgia. So she got interesting plants and then propagated them herself and spread them all through the garden. We took photos of 30-some different ground covers in that garden that I'm doing a video for. But they're all pretty simple to use easy to find ground covers. There's nothing, again, there's not the latest and the greatest. So she propagated a lot of the plants. The stone was free. She leaves all of her leaves on the ground. So there's not actually a lot of mulching going on that property. She's just mulching and composting everything there. And then she had told us, Holly's peeing back here in the background. She had told us early on that she was going to Tuesday morning to get all of her pots. All of her pots were, or she's getting them, you know, on Facebook Marketplace and all kinds of stuff, all kinds of ways. So, so the garden, yes, is expensive. You know, there's a lot that went into it. It's such a giant space, and plants were purchased and so on and so forth. But I think you'd be surprised at how much. It's a lot less than it would be if you hired a landscaper to come in and do that. That's all I'm saying. So there are ways to save money, you know, on some things, for sure. Okay, and again, getting plants that you can easily propagate and make more of yourself, so that you can buy one of and then make 20 of, you know, that's a strategy, right, for saving money. So let's see. Then another question about the maintenance. How time intensive is maintaining that garden. That garden is actually far less maintenance than you would think. She's letting things grow and coming to, you know, their full size in the garden, and then she's making decisions on whether to chop. I went through there with her last 2 years ago and just went, hey, I think it's time to just kind of reset this and reset that. And she did that. She took a lot of stuff and just cut them in half, you know, to sometimes she'll limb things up and layer underneath, and I made a video about that. And then, but there were some other things in the garden that just needed some tough love at that point. And, you know, we just went through, and then I came back later and she had done it. She had absolutely chopped things down, and she'll turn that material into, you know, into compost, which she reuses in the garden. So, but that garden is far less maintenance than you would think because of all the ground covers, because she's leaving her leaves in place. She's not looking at it through the lens of it's got to be perfect all the time. So that, you know, that lowers your maintenance a lot. If you don't think, you know, and I'm the same way, I like kind of a little bit of a natural look to it. I don't want it, every single thing to be perfectly crispy all the time. I think I like it to be somewhat natural. If the mulch is going over the curb a bit, you know, I'll re-edge it when I'm gonna mulch, but in between, if it's not that tidy, I don't really care. So it's not a super tidy garden, okay? But occasionally it's gonna require a garden like that that's planted that thickly, and you're allowing things to get big. Occasionally the jobs are going to be big when they do happen. You're gonna have to go through and cut everything, but cut things hard at some point. Okay, this person cut down some deutzia and a saucer magnolia, and the stumps are still there. Can they just mulch over them, or they need stump killer? I'll leave that up to you. I've never used stump killer on anything. I've just mulched over something planted in between the stumps and went on with life. Obviously, it depends on how big the stump is. And saucer magnolias could be 40 feet tall, so you know that stump is going to be quite large and maybe hard to deal with. So that one, maybe I'd get a stump grinder and grind that one. Of course, you can drill holes in it and do all kinds of things to get rid of stumps a little bit faster. One of the issues you're going to have is definitely with deutzia and probably saucer magnolia is suckering. So you're going to have to continue to fight that a bit if you're leaving the stumps in the ground. But I rarely, you know, think about, you know, I had somebody that said, you know, they were confused because I said I planted this amelanchier 6 months after that magnolia or the maple was taken down. The maple, hummingbird right here. Maple was about the size of the one that's back here in the background in the neighbor's yard right here. And we got the stump ground, and then I spread the material out, waited 6 months and planted the amelanchier. Downfall is there was still a little bit of stump down there, and that stump is now settling a bit. And so the tree got a little crooked this winter, but I didn't have any problem with the tree actually being planted back in the space. I didn't have to wait 2 years or any of the other things that you might hear that you have to do. It just depends on how thoroughly you tried to get the stump ground or the stump pulled out as to whether or not you can come right back in with another tree. If you're just cutting it off to the base and planting a tree right next to it without grinding the stump, I mean, maybe I'd wait longer for that stump to decline some, because one of the issues is just settling. You know, this is the problem. I lost 120 trees in Hurricane Fran at my old property. and the stumps that were left, I couldn't take out 120 stumps. And so over the course of the next 15 years, you end up with potential holes forming in the garden, which are, knee twisting, knee breaking kind of holes that just, you're walking along and all of a sudden you're, knee deep in a hole. Is not a fun experience, so I would recommend a stump grinder. If you want to plant a tree sooner than later, have somebody come in and grind them out. Do I ever get leaf spot, and do we just let it be? They get in peak summer on their hydrangeas. They get a lot of leaf spot. They're in zone 8B. They don't want to spray copper fungicide. Copper fungicide won't do you a whole lot of good anyway. I mean, these fungicides are mostly temporary things. I don't want to be on some sort of copper fungicide regimen forever. So it's the leaf spot that hydrangeas get is Cercospora, and other plants can get it too, but you'll really see it on big leaf hydrangeas, especially in the southeast where it's more humid, or in areas where it's maybe more overcast and that kind of thing. But pretty much so in the breeding for hydrangea macrophyllus, that's one thing that they're looking at. So they're obviously looking for remontant, looking for how well a hydrangea macrophylla reblooms, because basically there's no reason to bring a hydrangea macrophylla to market now unless it has some reblooming ability. The Dear Dolores hydrangea that I have in the back garden reblooms all summer long. And it also seems to be very Cercospora resistant. And so that's another thing in the breeding. So if we're looking at hydrangeas and we're doing a big breeding program, maybe there's 2,000 to start, and we've narrowed it down, and we get down to the trenches of, we have 12 hydrangea macrophyllas that all show great signs of reblooming. We only want to bring one to market. That's where you get into the trenches of, we need one that's the most Cercospora resistant that we can find. So this is one of those things I talked about Ram not buying the latest and the greatest. Sometimes, with something like leaf spot issues like that, that's the latest and the greatest is probably going to be more resistant overall to it. But like Dr. Durr said, we're breeding hydrangea macrophyllas in a cul-de-sac. If you cross two hydrangea macrophyllas that both get Cercospora leaf spot, you're not going to get the child of those two plants is going to still get Cercospora leaf spot. So we're just kind of crossing them in a cul-de-sac and hoping to get resistance. And the answer to your question is no, I never spray fungicides. Yes, I get Cercospora, I get leaf spot issues, not just Cercospora, but a couple other things, because it's the humid southeast United States. We're going to get some leaf spot problems. I do not worry about it. The one thing to think about, I'm going to have to change angles here, sun's right in my face. The one thing I want you to think about with your garden, and Steph will be going over this in the garden design on the Learn to Garden video series, is if you come to the open garden next Saturday, I've got, I'm looking around here, there's going to be, all these annuals will be peak. There's a pineapple lily over there that will be full bloom. The dogwood here will probably be about done, that's in the background. There's some early perennials that will kind of be finished, some later summer perennials that won't quite be open yet. All of my coneflowers are open. One of the big things in design is thinking about having things unfold through the whole season, okay? So that hydrangea macrophylla that's kind of finished blooming, even though it gets a little bit of leaf spot on it later in the season. If it gets extreme leaf spot on it, I'm chunking that plant. That's just my opinion, but rather than spray it. But what I'm saying is, back here where my big leaf hydrangeas are, something else around it will unfold and become the thing that people are looking at later in the summer. So that's the point of having all of these things from basically February through November in this garden, just kind of unfold all season long. That if I have something that has bloomed out and then goes through some funkiness, as it goes into the heat of the summer, there's something beside it's going to take your attention away from it. You're not going to sit here and focus in on the fact that I have leaf spot on the spirea back here if there's 25 other things happening around it. That's my point. So a lot of these issues that we would think about can kind of be rectified by making a person not look at it and look somewhere else, and having your garden just kind of unfold all year long. Just talking about the garden unfolding over there, had this mock orange come into full bloom a month ago, and now I've cut it back some and it's got a few flowers on it. I think it's probably out of frame. The guava here was in bloom 2 weeks ago. It's got beautiful blue-green foliage, but the blooms are finished on it. I won't get any fruit there. Our seasons are a little too short, but I do get the beautiful flowers, and the foliage is great on guavas. There's a Solidago that will bloom later in the summer. There is Rudbeckia maxima, which next year will be this tall right here, that has got a flower on it, but it's a little too, ooh, maybe you can see this one. Yeah, there's one flower on it this year, and it's about 3.5 to 4 feet tall. Next year it'll be 6 feet tall and have big giant leaves on it. This is a daylily, which is, I'm not a big daylily fan, but I did show this one off in the video from yesterday, and it's got an open flower on it, so I thought I'd come over here. This is autumn minaret. I'm 6 feet tall. It is 6.5 feet tall flower spike, you know, so there's a really neat daylily, but it's another thing that's unfolding, right? Everything is unfolding. I got conifers here that in the winter time will kind of take the show. The blueberries bloomed early. The fruit is pretty much done on them at this point. We've picked all the blueberries and shared them with the birds, but just this little row right here, you know, unfolds through the summer. So if there's a problem on something, or if there's a distraction on something, something else is drawing your eye in. I'm going on long enough about that. How big do rooted cuttings need to be before you plant them? They're currently 7 to 8 inch tall hydrangeas. You know, so if you're putting them into the ground, you know, it can be pretty stressful in June, putting that small of a plant in the ground. If you, for me, I would want to take them rooted cuttings through some sort of container on the way to going in the ground. So I might take my 7 to 8 inch tall hydrangea cuttings, put them in a 1 gallon container, trade gallon 3-quart container, and root them into that over the next couple of months. And then as it starts to cool down in the late summer, early fall, that's when I would put them in the ground. You could likely with hydrangeas get away with sticking them in the ground directly from a 7 to 8 inch tall rooted cutting. But for me, I'm probably going to swing, just from my years in the nursery business, I can't get 0 out of something. So I'm a little more conservative in that way. And I want everything kind of a consistent steps, you know, and part of that is teaching employees and anything else I was doing. But I'm probably going to put it in a trade gallon for about 2 months. Okay, which is a 3-quart pot. So somebody asked about microbial activity in a container. Is the soil alive? Plants in heat seem super stressed. Will using organic fertilizer help? Yes, using organic fertilizer will help with the microbial life in your containers, but keep in mind that's a really hard life for microbes in a container. So you'll get some benefits maybe in a container, but you think about how containers start their lives in the spring. When we plant containers in the spring, we're putting all this organic material in a container and putting these small plants into the container. So not only are your plants stressed from being overwatered in all likelihood, stop watering me, so are the soil microbes. And then there's going to be this peak time where the plants have rooted out just the right amount into the soil, and you're only having to water every other day, and it's not too hot outside, and so the soil in the container is not getting too hot. You're probably going to have some decent microbial activity in that container. But then you're going to hit this point in the midsummer where the container soil is going to be too hot. The plants will be over-rooted. They'll be demanding water once or twice a day. It's just a tough life, right? You're not going to get the same kind of microbial activity in a container being beneficial to your plants that you're going to get from things being in the ground. That's true even, I think, from raised beds as well, that you're better off improving your existing soil and having things in the ground with those microbial relationships that they form, where they're kind of safe under the mulch layer in your garden, and there's less of this, you know, that there is in a container, from really hot roots, really dry containers, really overly wet containers, all the problems that containers present to beneficial fungi, beneficial bacteria during the summer. You tend to get more anaerobic activity in a container than aerobic activity in a container. It's just hard to keep it consistent, right? Okay, let's see. So what does ACA stand for? Because I have the, and will we ever have long sleeve shirts available? Yeah, next round we're going to order some long sleeve shirts. There are, again, 3 new shirts. This one, the Holly one, and then the HortTube with Jim Putnam one. And then we've had the ACA t-shirt for a long time. ACA is the last 5 letters in all plant family names. So the, as an example, the Solidago that I pointed to just a minute ago is in the Aster ACA. It's in the Aster family, or the sunflower family, some people call it. These are composite flowers, cone flowers, black-eyed Susans, Gazania, which I showed one in a video yesterday. These are flowers that tend to have rays around the outside, like a sunflower, has the little rays around the outside. Those are individual flowers, and in the middle, all those are individual flowers. So you see all the seeds in a sunflower, each of those was a flower that got fertilized. This giant cone flower, also an aster, you can see the yellow rays around the outside of it. Are individual flowers, and then all the individual flowers in the center of them. But there are different genera. Each of these is in a different genus. So this is Solidago, which is one, that Gazania, Rudbeckia, those are different genera, but they're all in the same family. They all have similar similar traits, and it puts them into a family, and that family is the aster family or the sunflower family. The last 5 letters of each of those family names ends in ACA. So that's what ACA means. It's the ultimate plant nerd. It's the ultimate plant nerd t-shirt. That's actually what it is. But we have, once you start, I've done a couple of plant family videos. Once you hone in on this, you'll recognize some of the similarities things can have within the same family, even though they're in a different genus. It's kind of fun. Then I got comments last week. I've said in a couple of videos, holly has become kind of stompy in the flowers. And then I got a couple of things about she may be losing her sight or whatever. Yeah, she's 15 years old. She's definitely losing her sight. She's definitely losing her hearing. She's always been off leash. And now I have to go back, have to come up behind her and tap her sometimes to get her attention. And she's definitely losing her mental faculties a bit. Like 2:30 in the morning a few weeks ago, I caught her just staring at the stove in the kitchen, at 2:30 in the morning. She was obviously confused about where she was, whatever. She was confused in some way. So when I said she's gotten stompy in the flowers, that is not a criticism. The dog can stomp all the flowers she wants to stomp. She's earned all of that and more. So it's not a criticism. If anybody took that as I'm somehow being critical of her or not recognizing the fact that she's obviously everything, her sight and her mind and her hearing are all fading. I absolutely recognize all of those things, and not my first time with an elderly dog. And but again, she can stomp all the flowers she wants. And but I will joke with her about it. She won't hear me joking with her about it, but I will joke with her about it. Okay, let's see. Do compost piles have to be located in the sun? It's definitely helpful to have them in a little more sun to get some heat built up in them. But I see lots of people composting things in the shade. I didn't realize somebody just walked right behind me. That was kind of funny. This is the city's property that I'm standing on here. That was kind of funny. It's helpful to have them in the sun and then adding some moisture occasionally to build up that heat in them. Although I do see people composting in part shade and shady areas, but I do think when I dump a pile of mulch on the driveway or wood chips or whatever, it's out in the full sun here and it just starts cooking immediately. So I think it is helpful to have more sun on it, the better. Does compost add a component of fertilizer? Yes, initially. For sure. It obviously depends on what was composted. I mean, that has some impact on, what the outcome of the compost. But it has some fertilizer component to it for sure. It just goes away a little quicker because it's not being stored in rock. Somebody asked if it's too late to prune a 4-year-old green giant arborvitae. These are the kind of questions we have on the weekly garden planner. So I talked about the Learn to Garden video series with Steph doing design videos on it. The weekly garden planner has like hard dates on things. Like you want to be finished pruning this by this time of year because it needs time to, you know, to get itself back to whatever it needs to be for fall or the winter or next spring. So those are the kinds of questions that are answered on the weekly garden planner, and there's a discount code down below this video for it as well. If you're interested, I think it's a helpful, you know, set of videos for each month to let you know it's kind of too late for this, too early for that, whatever. So it depends on how much pruning you were doing on it. You can still prune conifers for sure in the summertime. Keep in mind, if you hard prune a conifer in the summer or hard prune anything in the summer, like if I prune this cryptomeria hard, the foliage that's down in that plant has not seen any direct sun, and it could really scald it pretty badly. For me, I'd have rather done the pruning of my conifers much earlier in the season, during the winter or very early to mid-spring at the latest. Again, I can still prune it. If it's a crazy limb on something, prune that whenever. But if it's general pruning, I mean, I might go through this cryptomeria and just tip prune it, you know, just barely prune it. But I don't think I'd want to hard prune it in the heat of the summer. The sun is not quite on this, but it'll be on here for 10 hours today. And when it is, if I cut this thing and let's say I cut a third of it off today, it's going to burn the rest of the foliage down through that plant pretty severely. And it's going to take a long time for it. It'll still come back, but I think it definitely would not look great. So I don't think this is the best time to prune it hard. But if you're barely pruning it or pruning some random limb off of it, go for it. So when you're underplanting trees, let's say with low shrubs or ground covers or whatever, they're saying they understand that it's going to take longer for them to get established. I've talked about if you're planting near established things, it's going to take longer for those new things to kind of catch up and be on their own. You have to water them a little bit longer, at least have to think about them a little bit longer than you do in some newly planted, newly composted, newly mulched space that doesn't have root competition. Well, they were saying, will the plants also grow smaller overall? Initially, probably. My neighbor's red maple over there, my hosta and other perennials that are along that line. I've got a camellia over there that's been a struggle to get it established, get it rooted in and be on its own. I've got even cast iron plant over there that's been a little slow to get going. I've got a very dwarfing elephant ear over there. I got an elephant ear, and we got elephant ear in the back garden. It's this tall, leaves this big as you would expect by June, and one over there on the property line it's like a foot tall, and it's just dwarfing because of that tree is so greedy. Eventually, though, it'll find a way, and I think within a year, the next 2 or 3 seasons, it'll come out and be bigger, better, fuller. But yes, initially it can appear that it's kind of dwarfing the plants, but I think that will work itself out in time as long as you're still taking care of them. Let's see. Somebody said their hydrangea bloomed more this year, even though they didn't fertilize them. What's the best way to fertilize them? So all my hydrangeas got fertilized back in February, just like everything else. So there was only once a year. It's a once a year fertilizing for us on all of our woody shrubs. The only things that I would refertilize are containers, annuals, vegetable garden, which is technically annuals, are annuals for us. Maybe some perennial that I was trying to get a lot out of during the season. Those are the only things that I would readdress with fertilizer. But just once a year, you could still do it now if you wanted to. But yes, hydrangeas bloom just more in general. I think we just had mild winters everywhere, and so we just didn't have the kind of damage that we see on that big leaf hydrangeas can take in extreme winter events. They're just blooming out like crazy everywhere. Best that I've ever seen them here in our area. A lot of times here in my area, the issue with big leaf hydrangeas is they don't go to dormant enough. And so then when we get our first cold, some of the buds can be killed, not because the temperature was super low, it's just the plant just didn't seem prepared, you know, for that cold, you know, when it came. So and another one from last week, I went down the dark tunnel of giving my opinion on coconut coir being not the most environmentally friendly thing to bring something from the tropics to mulch our gardens or put in containers or whatever. You know, opinions are dangerous on the internet, obviously. And then somebody just asked the question, is peat or coconut coir more hydrophobic? Which one is more hydrophobic? Meaning, which one is hardest to get wet once it becomes dry? The coconut coir is definitely, to me, a little bit harder to wet than peat moss, but both of them can resist water. You can add, there are additives that you can add to peat and coconut coir, any kind of soil mix to make them less hydrophobic if you're interested in that. But yeah, there's an issue in the whole world of, you know, growing small annuals and perennials where they're using a lot of peat, is if they let the peat dry completely out, the next time you water, sometimes the water will either sit on top of the peat or just go, or the peat will have shrunk in the pot and allow the water just to run over the edges and not actually wet the material. So they resist that water. But coconut coir seems to me to be a little harder to re-wet initially when it's completely dried out. I talked about doing cutbacks in the garden and trying to get the timing right to have peak flowers for when the open garden event is happening next week. And I said I just kind of stopped because at this point we'll just deadhead things rather than trying to generally prune things. I think it's just too late for that to happen. They were just asking what the timing would be. I think you probably need about 3 weeks to take a perennial, a repeat blooming perennial. Make sure it's a repeat blooming perennial. Like one of these salvias or even an annual salvia or any of the annuals in the garden. You probably need about 3 weeks to cut them in half to have them come back out into full flower. Then they were adding like things like panicle hydrangeas and that kind of thing. Those things I'm not going to cut on. You know, the shrubs, I'm not going to cut on them to try to time them in any way, shape, or form. I'm just going to let them do their thing. But the annuals and the all summer long blooming perennials can be, you know, you can take a third off of them at some point during the summertime, but I would expect, again, for it to take probably 2 to 3 weeks for them to come back out and be peak flowering again. Let's see. Somebody has a weedy perennial bed project. What's the best way to get rid of the grasses and weeds? Should they pull them, dig them out, till the bed, replant and mulch? So I think if you have a perennial border and it's been overcome with weeds, I think you should pop the perennials out of the ground. Make sure you clean the weeds off the roots, you know, after you've pulled them out of the ground. Store them to the side. You can container plant them or put them heel them into a bed somewhere with some compost and put them to the side, and then address your weedy problem, which you could spray, mow, till, whatever, cover with cardboard, cover with a sheet of plastic for some period of time. All different kinds of ways we could knock those weeds back, but get it under control and then replant everything back in that bed. I don't recommend tilling a whole lot. I always said tilling is killing. So if that soil's in pretty good shape, I probably wouldn't till it. But if it's not an area you've ever prepped before, you were just plugging perennials in there all along, you might put some compost down and till it in, and then, you know, try to rake those weeds out. And keep in mind, you'll be bringing up weed seeds. So you're gonna get weeds back in there pretty quick. So if you are tilling it, get all that prep work done as fast as possible so you can get those perennials replanted back in that bed and get it mulched as quick as possible. Because if you don't put a cap back on it, you're gonna have weeds just explode in there again, especially this time of year. Weeds can really, really grow quickly in June. You get 1 rain, 2 rains, you know, in June, the ground gets moist. Those weeds that germinated earlier in the season had just been sitting there waiting will go really, really quickly. So, but I always think the best way to rejuvenate a border that's been overtaken by weeds is to dig the perennials out, and so that you're just, everything else that's left is you're going to attack it in whatever way you want to attack it. Somebody was asking about watering in general, and I know this is the most confusing part. It's one of the videos in the Learn to Garden video series is about watering, and I'll probably readdress it in the future. They're watering things, but it seems like the plants are really dry at the base of the plants pretty quickly. So if it's newer planted things within the last year or two, you will notice that the bark that was in the container, because we don't break all that soil completely up and get rid of a lot of that bark that comes on the containers. Sometimes if the plant was root bound and it was planted in bark in the container, it'll be dry right at the base of that plant in an ongoing way. Like you've saturated the surrounding area, but you can't keep that center part of that plant wet. That can happen. And there's more, a lot of the plants we receive, if a nursery has plenty of water, then their best strategy for growing plants is to have the most well-draining soil they could possibly have. So if they've got giant ponds to water the plants, best case scenario, their plants dry out every single day so that they can water them every single day. That keeps them from overwatering them, which is the most hazardous thing in the nursery business, is to keep your plants too wet. They're sitting on the ground. There's a lot of, a lot of splashing water, overhead irrigating. A lot can go wrong. A lot of disease problems in nursery situations where you're watering too much. So the better that soil drains, the better for the nursery. But the better that soil drains, the more harder it is for us to get them established in the ground, because the water just falls right through that. You can watch it. You can sit there and water right at the base of that plant and watch that water just disappear through that bark. Again, that bark is kind of hydrophobic too. It's difficult to re-wet it once it's really, really dry. It's an issue. And there's a few plants in this garden that I've got a holly up here in the corner that's goes thin down at the bottom. It's now going to be tree formed because, like I'm going to act on the video like I planned on tree forming it, but really what happened is it's gotten kind of thin at the bottom because it was not watered well enough, and it had that same problem. It was a root bound problem, not a soil drainage problem. It just was so root bound in the container it had been in that it's difficult to re-wet it, and it thinned out because of that. It's an issue. Unfortunately, you just have to water those plants a little bit longer. They'll eventually get established and be absolutely fine. But it does. I've noticed that on some plants that are in this garden that I can't get them wet right at the base of the plant because the material that was in there drains too well. Let's see. So somebody asked a method to reduce Carolina cherry laurel seedlings. So we get a lot of, there's a few native cherries in our area and all over the country. I can see one up here that's about maybe 30 feet tall. They're good at producing seed, really good at producing seed. It's in the Rosaceae, from the back to that ACA question. It's in the rose family. They're good at making seed. Here's the thing on any of these questions about reducing seed. So if you somehow have Chinese privet or Japanese privet, or cherry laurels or anything that's good at making seed, prune them after they flower. And that way, where that flower was is where that seed's going to form, obviously. So if you just prune them after they flower, you can reduce a lot of the seed that's on them. So that's what I would do on your Carolina cherry laurels, is just shear them after they flower in the spring, and that will prevent that seed from ever maturing. I've got this one literally overhangs the garden. Anyway, I can see all the seed up there in the process of forming. I can't reach that one, but if you can reach them, shear them off. If it's anything that produces seed in your garden, you're worried about it being invasive, you're worried about it being, a lot of our native things can get weedy in our gardens by producing seed like that. And then I said last week, and here's another one I stepped into last week, was on Shindo viburnum. I was pointing out that I thought it was being overplanted, despite the fact that I have recommended it as a plant in the past. It is a great plant. Fast growing once established, kind of slow, I think, when you first plant them, but fast growing. And my point was, I was talking about plants where we've seen over and over and over where the same thing gets planted for so long that a disease ends up coming through it. So we had the red tip photinias. We've seen Leylands, have issues. I would imagine at some point green giants, because there's so many of them out there. We've seen rose rosette on the knockout roses. You just see it's the latest and the greatest, and then everybody plants so many of them. And what I've seen with Shindo viburnums is like, yes, I think it's a great plant. I think it's a good plant to use as a screening plant. But when I say that, I also have videos on the channel saying don't plant a monoculture. It's best not, I don't say don't, I say this is best not to plant a monoculture. So this screen that I have across here, I did in a video earlier this year, has 13 different plants make up that screen, 13 different species. So if one of them gets a problem, I haven't lost the entire border. So that's my point, is what I'm seeing with Shindo viburnums is it's such a good screening plant that people are using it to frame their entire yards in. I can walk through this neighborhood and every 15th house, 20th house, whatever, have just framed their entire front gardens in or side street in, with shindos. And it's just the latest and the greatest. And you just see the same pattern. We have so many great leafy evergreen plants that we can use in my area, but people will just want to hone in on what's the one that makes the what's the one solution that I can go and buy, put them in the ground and have this job done and never have to think about it again. That seems to be the thought process about this kind of thing. And it leads to, or, oh my God, I love that thing, I have to have it. And then everybody does the I have to have it. And then there's, it's just we're creating monocultures, sometimes, accidental monocultures that will cause problems in the future. So it wasn't a criticism of Shindo viburnum, it's a criticism of a behavior that, that gardeners have, of everybody wants the thing that, is the thing of the day. And I think over time, though, that creates problems when there's too many of them out in the world. So I counted the other day, I was thinking about this question, thinking about this comments. There are I counted 327 species in this garden. There's more than that because just walking through and counting I'm never going to come up with the right number. There's 327 species in this garden. There's a lot more plants than that. So, I've got Chamaecyparis obtusa in the ground right there, but I have like maybe 8 different Chamaecyparis obtusas. So that was only counted once, that species, right? It was only counted once. So there's a lot more plants than that, but just straight, just species wise, there's 327 minimum species in this garden, which gets added to all the time. Occasionally something dies and we'll reduce that number, but there's 327 species in this garden. If I went through the next 40 houses along this road from this house out, I probably couldn't ever reach 327. I don't know how many houses I would have to go to before I reach 327 different species. Nor would I expect anyone else to garden like this. I'm not saying that this is the way to garden. I'm just saying there's so many great plants out there that we don't really have to go and all have the same exact thing framing our gardens in, or the same exact trees like crepe myrtles, or the same exact things. There's just so many things. And if I think, most of these things are in great shape out here in this garden, partly due to the fact that there's not a monoculture of anything here. So anyway, okay, enough words on that. I'm just trying to, yes, Shindo viburnum is a great plant. Yes, I've talked about it being a great plant. No, we probably shouldn't plant 40 million of them, in every city in Southeast United States. I get the redbud question of the week. Leader pops out of one. You just have to reform a leader at some point. They were asking when to pull up a new leader. I think it'd be not getting the kind of growth on my redbud right now that I was earlier in the season. So I might wait till next spring to pull up a fresh new piece of growth as the new leader. I think if I tried to bend anything on there at this point in June, I'd probably break limbs. They're thick enough now. I think they would resist being pulled up as a new leader. Somebody's in zone 7A. I guess they've been moved into 7B. They want a Fats hedra. They're in Southern Virginia. They're in a mountain area and it has some wind. There's a couple things planted nearby it. I don't think Fats hedra will probably perform all that well in a windy winter space in zone 7B. We're in 8A here and probably haven't had, probably the last 4 winters, we haven't had anything colder than a zone 9 winter in a long time. Even ours got damaged during that freeze 2 winters ago. So whatever they called that, they've got names for weather events now, but that crazy cold we had December 23rd of 22, and it hurt it. So if you did, okay, my established Fats hedra that's 4 years old over here will probably tolerate very cold conditions now. It's very thick. I might lose some of the new growth on it, but I think it would survive most winters now. So part of my answer would be, I think if you got it established for a couple of winters, it would probably be fine. So if you're going to plant your Fats hedra, which is marginally hardy in your area, you're going to want to winter protect it the first couple of winters to really get it firmly established, and then it will probably be okay in the future after that, unless you got, -5 would kill it. 0 degrees would kill it dead in the future. So you'd want to think about that in future years. I'm on like number 22 or something here. I'll probably take 3 or 4 of these and move them over to the next week. So somebody asked for recommended plants around and in a dry creek bed. So I guess it's probably seasonally wet creek bed. You'll see a lot of our native plants grow in those kind of riparian areas where they can be seasonally wet, or where something can grow on the edge of a creek area and then root down into it. A lot of our native plants grow in those kinds of situations. So clethra and American beautyberries and Itea actually grows in the water every time I see it. But there's a ton of plants that grow. A lot of our native plants grow in those kind of wet, seasonally moist riparian areas. And then there's a lot of Asian plants that do too. Edgeworthia is one that comes to mind. It usually grows in riparian areas in its native habitat, and we stick them out in the driest spots in our gardens. But so there's a ton of plants, and I definitely lean on a lot of natives. You'll notice that when you're in wooded areas hiking, a lot of times you'll see really just kind of large tree spaces in the higher ground areas. And maybe some carexes and some, few things in the understory. When you start to go downhill on a trail, you'll start to pick up some more shrubby understory things and ferns and, those kinds of things as you get into those riparian areas that, are wetter down toward the bottom areas. You'll see the plants change in woodland areas, going up and down. In the woodlands. Somebody was asking about using ground covers as an alternative to large mulch rings around trees. And then what kind of ground covers. They're in zone 6 in the Midwest. I would find whatever botanic garden is near you. I can't recommend this enough. We took 30 some pieces of B-roll for ground covers at Rams that I'm going to put a video together later. I could find 50 or more at the Ralston right now growing up under trees. So Asiatic jasmine and all kinds of, some things you wouldn't be able to grow in your zone 6 Midwest garden. But there's probably, again, 50 to 100 ground covers being used over there. It's reducing the mulch that they're using, reducing, all kinds of, and the trees don't have any problem with it. A living mulch underneath them doesn't seem to bother them at all. I don't want it really growing on the tree, just, I don't want that to happen. Some of them, some vines will do both the crawling and the climbing, but I would go to a botanic garden in your area and see what type of ground covers they're using under the trees. And again, as much diversity as you can bring to it. When I say these kinds of things, I want to go back to the 327 species in this garden, and the fact that Ram's using probably 30 plus. I don't know, maybe as many as 50 different ground covers in her garden. None of them, again, are the super expensive things. They're things that she's bought in a small container, and then she slowly spread them into various areas in the garden. And then the Ralston has that many. So when you go, look for several different things you can use for different looks, maybe even combining some different colors of ground covers as well. Some that are green, and some that are chartreuse, and some that are multicolored. Maybe some that go dormant, maybe some that stay evergreen, maybe, but I would go to a garden near you and examine. Everybody's always looking up. They're looking for the flowers and things. Places like Duke Gardens or the Ralston or those things, they're great for solutions for things like this, ground covers. All these gardens have slopes. They have difficult areas to manage, and you can see how they're managing those. If you live on a sloped lot, Duke Gardens the terrain at Duke Gardens is like this. And so, you can go over there and get all kinds of ideas for what you could do on a slope and how they present the plants in different spaces with different light, from different, all kinds of things you can learn there. Okay, open garden details. Somebody asked if there's a campground near the house. We are Harvest Host members, and Raleigh Brewing is right up the street. I know they're on the Harvest Host list. There's a couple Harvest Host places here in Raleigh, if they're available. And then at our fairgrounds down the road actually has a campground. It's out in the middle of a field, but so it's probably pretty hot out there, but as long as you got air conditioning, they do have plug-ins and that kind of thing. Let's see. So it's June 21st, which is next Friday from 3 to 7, and then on the 22nd from 8 to 3. We're hoping that we can discourage people from parking on Harris Street. This is 709 Harris Street in Raleigh, North Carolina, unless you have mobility issues. So there is some parking along our street, but I think it's best if we save those for folks who, may have more of a struggle to walk, the distance. And otherwise you can park. There's a church close by here. You can find it on a map. There's a church right there. It's a Saturday. They wouldn't mind us parking in the parking lot over there. It's a big parking lot. For this, let's see. There's no fee or charges, but we'll have t-shirts available. There's 6 or 7 different designs now. Let's see. If you have cash, that's probably the easiest, the fastest thing for us to accomplish out here. Let's see, it's rain or shine. One thing that Steph pointed out, and I haven't really thought about, if you're allergic to bees, this might not be, I have not been stung by a bee here in the 4 years of this garden project but there is a lot of opportunity for someone to get stung out here. The bees they just don't care that we're here. They're doing their thing. I'm filming this morning at 7:45 at this point, probably in the morning on Saturday. By 9 or 10 o'clock this morning, this place will be bees everywhere. And I mean, truly wall to wall bees. So prepare yourself for that. If you're, it may not be a place for you if you're, badly allergic to them, but just warning everyone that there are, as you would expect, in a clown college designed garden, a lot of bees. Okay, there'll be giveaways all day, the Friday and the Saturday. I did the unboxing video, and there were a couple really nice comments about, you don't have to give anybody anything, we'd come to your garden no matter what or whatever. But I have these companies that, I've worked with, and they're generously giving us some stuff, and I like to help those companies out and give away something at the same time. It's just kind of fun. Somebody will have a memory from it. And again, I've talked about that in lots of videos recently, that a lot of the plants that are in this garden have meaning for us, besides the fact that I like that particular plant. They have some other meaning from some place we got it, or some friend, or some story, or Steph's father, or whatever. Okay. Holly's time will be limited in the garden, I've been saying, because I put her in already. Places to go other than this garden. The Raleigh Farmers Market's pretty epic if you've never been there. It's a 364-day a year farmers market, so not like a pop-up farmers market. There's big giant buildings, a seafood restaurant, if you want to call 900 ways to fry fish a seafood restaurant, and then most popular restaurant in Raleigh though, and then all kinds of activities to do at the farmers market over there. Raleigh Rose Gardens in our neighborhood, the Duke Gardens I had in a video a couple weeks ago. I talk about the Ralston all the time. That's a great, incredible collection of plants over there. The North Carolina Botanic Garden is in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. It's not that long of a drive, and it is mostly native plants and a great representation of our great native plants of North Carolina. The Art Museum has an incredible open space garden. And then we're near downtown Raleigh. Downtown is, downtown Raleigh's grown a lot. Let's just say that in my lifetime. It used to be a place on 5 o'clock on Friday. 5 o'clock on Friday in Raleigh when I was a kid, the only people that were downtown were police and people being arrested and people and bail bondsmen. That was it until 9 o'clock on Monday morning when it filled up with people working again. Now it's, people live there. It's kind of an interesting evolution of downtown Raleigh. Let's see. The downtown Cary Park is pretty epic as downtown, as a city park, as an example of a city park. And then Pullen Park is a great place if you have kids. That's close by here as well. There you go. Thank you guys very much for following along. Again, you can ask gardening questions down in the comment section below. I will have probably met several of you before the next Q&A next Sunday. If I don't end up, this week will be kind of crazy, so we'll see what the video content will actually be. Next Sunday's Q&A may get delayed a couple of days. I don't know how this week is going to go. I haven't quite finished the patio here yet. I've got some I got a mortar in the brick edge around the outside of it in the next few days, and hopefully I'll have that done. I've got and we got several other projects I would like to complete before folks get here as well. So thank you guys so much for following along.